Harrison thought he was the wolf, and I was just the obedient sheep grazing in suburbia. He kissed my forehead this morning, convinced I was nothing more than a harmless housewife. Then brazenly took his mistress to the most critical meeting of his life. He forgot that you never know who holds the leash until it tightens. When those boardroom doors opened, he did not find a buyer. He found me, holding the absolute destruction of his career in my hands. My name is Juniper Hollis. To the rest of the world, and specifically to the man standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Manhattan penthouse, I was simply the red-headed fixture in the kitchen, a woman composed of flour, school runs, and mild manners. Harrison stood there, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, looking out at the city skyline as if he had personally sculpted the steel and glass from his own ambition. It was a Tuesday morning, the sort of crisp, clear day that narcissists mistake for a cosmic endorsement of their greatness. I watched him from the marble island where I was assembling lunchboxes for the twins. The smell of freshly baked cinnamon rolls filled the air, a scent designed to simulate a perfect, nurturing home. It was the perfume of the lie I had been living for a decade. Harrison took a deep breath, his chest expanding, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was 46 years old, and in his mind. Today was the day he ascended from being merely wealthy to being a god. Today was the day he would sell Thorn Dynamis to Ethelgard Holdings. He believed he was the Wolf of Wall Street, sharp and predatory, while I was just the sheep grazing blindly on the money he brought home. "Leo, Maya, shoes on. Please, the bus will be downstairs in 10 minutes, I called out softly. My children came running into the kitchen, a whirlwind of energy and innocence. I smoothed Leo's hair and checked Maya's backpack to ensure her inhaler was in the side pocket. I loved them with a ferocity that Harrison would never understand. To him, they were extensions of his brand, props to be brought out at galas to prove his virility and stability. To me, they were the only pure things in this glass cage. I kissed their heads, sending them off to the foyer with the nanny, ensuring they were shielded from the toxic radiation of their father's ego. Harrison did not turn around to say goodbye to them. He was too busy staring at his reflection in the window, superimposed over the Empire State Building. He took a sip of the espresso I had made him, a specific single-origin bean he insisted on, and finally deigned to acknowledge my existence. "You're up early," he said, not looking at me, but at the reflection of me. "I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for today," I replied, wiping my hands on a floral apron. "It is the big meeting, isn't it? With the Swiss group?" Harrison scoffed, a short, dismissive sound that grated against my nerves. He turned around, his eyes sweeping over me with a familiar mix of boredom and pity. He saw a woman in her late 30s who was content with charity luncheons and PTA politics. He saw the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, or what he thought was a small inheritance, and believed it was the only reason I had any financial standing before I met him. He thought he had rescued me from mediocrity. "Juniper, please," he said, walking over to the counter and picking up his gold watch. "Do not try to wrap your head around the complexities of a cross-border acquisition. It is not just a meeting, it is an execution. I am going to walk into that room, hand over a dying company for 10 times its value, and walk out a king. You just focus on whatever it is you do. The bake sale? The library fund? The homeless shelter benefit," I corrected him gently, keeping my voice level. "But Harrison, before you go conquer the world, I need you to sign something for the twins." I reached under a stack of napkins and pulled out a thick document. It was clipped neatly, with colorful sticky notes indicating where he needed to sign. I had placed it there knowing his routine perfectly. He was running 3 minutes behind schedule. His adrenaline was spiking, and his arrogance was at an all-time high. A man who thinks he is about to make $200 million does not read the fine print on domestic paperwork. "Now, really?" he sighed, checking his phone. "I have a car waiting downstairs. It is just the updated dental insurance forms and the liability waivers for their summer camp." I lied, my heartbeat steady and slow. The school needs them back by noon or they lose their spots. You know how bureaucracy is. Harrison rolled his eyes, uncapped his fountain pen, a Mont Blanc I had bought him for our 5th anniversary, and scribbled his signature on the lines I pointed to. He did not read a single word. He did not notice that the header of the document was folded over. He did not see that he was not signing a dental form, but a personal guarantee making him solely liable for all existing and future debts of Thorn Dynamis subsidiaries, effectively bypassing the corporate veil. He was signing away his safety net, his golden parachute, and his future, all while checking his email with his free hand. "There," he said, tossing the pen onto the counter. "Happy?" "Very," I said, and I meant it. "You have no idea how much this helps." He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. I followed him, playing the part of the doting wife one last time. At the door, he paused, allowing me to lean in. I kissed his cheek. His skin smelled of sandalwood and betrayal. I lingered for a second, breathing it in, letting the coldness of my own resolve settle into my bones. "Good luck, Harrison," I whispered. "Knock them dead," he smirked, that lopsided grin that used to charm me and now only made me think of a shark sensing blood. "Luck is for losers. Juniper, I make my own fate." He walked out the door without looking back. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, the smile dropped from my face instantly. It was like switching off a light. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the document he had just signed, and slid it into a fireproof envelope. Phase 1 was complete. I did not need to be in the car with him to know exactly what happened next. I had lived with this man for 15 years. I knew his habits, his vices, and his sins better than he knew them himself. Plus, the private investigator I had hired 6 months ago had provided me with a live audio feed from the interior of his Mercedes. As his driver navigated the morning congestion of Manhattan, heading toward the financial district, Harrison pulled out his burner phone. He kept it in the inside pocket of his jacket, thinking he was clever, thinking I didn't know about the monthly bill that was paid through a shell company I also happened to monitor. He dialed a number he had memorized. "I am on my way," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming smoother, more predatory. "I am ready. Harry, I am so nervous," a female voice replied. Serena, 24 years old, ambitious, beautiful in a way that was entirely manufactured. She was the final accessory Harrison felt he needed to complete his ensemble of power. "Do not be nervous," Harrison commanded. "You are with me. Listen, did you wear the dress I told you to get?" "The teal one?" "Yes, it is really tight. Harry, I feel like I cannot breathe." "Good," he purred. "Teal is a psychological trigger. It suggests stability and calmness. It will disarm the Swiss investors. They will look at you and see a high-level advisor. Not just wear the glasses too. The frames make you look older." "I cannot believe I am going to be a strategic advisor," Serena giggled, the sound tinny through the surveillance audio. "What if they ask me about the biodata?" "They will not ask you anything. You are there to nod, look at the papers, and whisper in my ear. I do the talking. Once this deal is signed, Serena, everything changes. The cash hits the offshore accounts by Friday." "And her?" Serena asked. She did not use my name. I was just her, the obstacle, the old furniture to be discarded. "I told you," Harrison said, his tone dismissive. "I will have the lawyers draft the papers next week. She will get the house and a generous alimony. She is simple. She will not fight. She does not have the stomach for conflict. She will probably thank me for being honest." I stood in my kitchen, sipping my tea, listening to my husband plan the end of our marriage with the casual indifference of someone ordering a sandwich. He truly believed I was weak. He mistook silence for submission and kindness for stupidity. The car stopped. I could hear the door open. He was picking her up on the way to the office, a risk so brazen it bordered on insanity. But that was Harrison. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to flaunt his victory. Taking his mistress to the closing meeting was his way of giving the universe the middle finger. God, look at you. Harrison groaned as Serena entered the car. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the shifting of leather seats. Not here, Harry, the driver, Serena whispered, though she didn't sound like she wanted him to stop. The partition is up. He is deaf and blind as far as we are concerned, Harrison said. The sounds that followed were nauseating, a wet, fumbling intimacy exchanged in the back of a moving vehicle. They praised each other, feeding on their shared delusion. Harrison promised her a penthouse in Paris. He promised her that she was the muse behind his success. He told her that she was the only one who truly understood his genius. To the future, Harrison said, breathless. To us, Serena replied. I reached out and turned off the audio feed. I did not need to hear any more. I walked over to the window where Harrison had stood moments ago. The city below looked like a circuit board, cold and logical. Harrison thought he was driving toward a coronation. He had no idea that he was driving a hearse. And he was the one in the box. He had told Serena to wear teal to impress the owner of Ethelgard Holdings. I looked down at my own reflection in the glass. I was not wearing an apron anymore. I had already laid out my outfit for the meeting on the bed. A bespoke white suit, sharp enough to cut glass. Harrison was right about one thing. Teal is a lovely color. But white is the color of mourning in some cultures. And today, I was going to bury him. The headquarters of Thorn Dynamis was not merely a building. It was a giant architectural middle finger to the concept of modesty. Standing at 40 stories of curved glass and reinforced steel in the center of the financial district, it was designed to reflect the skyline back at itself. Distorted and aggrandized, much like my husband's ego, Harrison had insisted on the lease despite the exorbitant cost, because he believed that address alone could transmute a failing biotech startup into a Fortune 500 empire. As the black sedan pulled up to the curb, the building loomed over them, a glistening obelisk dedicated to the worship of capital. Harrison stepped out of the car first, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of a man who believed the pavement should feel honored to meet his Italian leather soles. He extended a hand to Serena, not with the tenderness of a lover, but with the grandiosity of a showman unveiling a prize. Serena emerged, blinking against the harsh sunlight, her teal dress clinging to her frame like a second skin. It was a beautiful dress, I will admit, but against the gray and navy austerity of the corporate world, it screamed for attention in a dialect that the old money brokers found distasteful. They swept through the revolving doors and into the lobby, a cavernous space echoing with the click-clack of hurried footsteps. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that suggested cryopreservation, a subtle tactic Harrison employed to keep visitors uncomfortable and alert. The security guards, men who had been with the company since its humbler days in a rented loft in Brooklyn, nodded stiffly. They knew who Serena was. Everyone knew. In a company where information was the primary currency, the CEO's affair was not a secret. It was simply another liability that had not yet been audited. Harrison guided Serena toward the private executive elevator, bypassing the bank of lifts used by the common employees. He swiped his keycard, and the doors slid open with a deferential hush. "Chin up," he murmured to her as the elevator began its rapid ascent to the 46th floor. "You own this space. Walk like you built it." Serena adjusted her glasses, the oversized frames slipping slightly down her nose. "I just do not want to say the wrong thing. Harry, these people have PhDs. "And I employ them," Harrison countered, checking his teeth in the mirrored wall of the elevator. "Intelligence is a commodity. Serena, power is the ability to rent that intelligence. Today, you are power." The doors opened onto the executive suite, a sprawling expanse of minimalist furniture and abstract art that cost more than the annual salaries of the custodial staff. The atmosphere was thick, charged with a specific frequency of anxiety that only occurs before a hostile takeover or a massive sale. The administrative assistants were typing furiously, their eyes darting toward the conference room. A group of junior analysts huddled in the corner, speaking in hushed tones, clutching coffees as if they were life rafts. When Harrison strode into the open plan area leading to the boardroom, the conversation died instantly. It was the silence of a jungle when a predator enters the clearing. Standing by the window was Marcus Vance, the director of operations. Marcus was a man of 60, who wore suits that were 10 years out of style and possessed a moral compass that Harrison had been trying to demagnetize for years. Beside him stood two of the legacy board members, men who had invested in Harrison's potential back when he was charming and less delusional. They looked tired. They looked like men who knew the ship was sinking, but were being told by the captain that the water rising around their ankles was just a new swimming pool feature. "Gentlemen," Harrison boomed, his voice projecting the artificial bonhomie of a game show host. "A glorious morning for a 9-figure exit, is it not?" Marcus turned, his gaze drifting from Harrison to the young woman standing beside him, his eyebrows knitted together, a silent question forming on his lips. "Allow me to make introductions," Harrison continued, placing a hand on the small of Serena's back. "This is Serena Blair. She has been consulting with me privately on the Ethelgard deal for the past 3 months. I have appointed her as our senior strategic advisor for the transition. She will be joining us in the boardroom." The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was heavy. It had mass and density. Marcus blinked, his eyes widening slightly. A senior strategic advisor, a title that did not exist 24 hours ago, bestowed upon a woman whose previous strategic experience, to their knowledge, involved navigating the VIP list at a club in the meatpacking district. "Harrison," Marcus said slowly, his voice low. "The meeting is restricted to Level 10 clearance. We are discussing proprietary genetic coding and the full transfer of intellectual property. Is Ms. Blair vetted for that level of sensitivity?" Harrison laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Vetted? Marcus, she is my right hand. She understands the vision of Ethelgard better than anyone. She represents the fresh perspective we need." One of the board members, a silver-haired man named Elias, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Harrison, the buyers are Swiss. They are conservative. Bringing an unexpected advisor into the final signing might unsettle them. We need to project stability." Harrison's smile tightened at the edges. The mask slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing the sneer beneath. "Stability is for the mediocre. Elias, Ethelgard Holdings is not buying us because we are safe. They are buying us because we are revolutionary. They are a mysterious entity. Yes, but my correspondence with them has been clear. They care about the bottom line. They care about the patent portfolio. They are leaving the management structure entirely intact. They trust me. And if I say Serena is essential, then she is essential." He stepped closer to the group, his physical presence looming over them. "Do not let your outdated sensibilities jeopardize my deal. We are selling a dream today. Gentlemen, get on board or get off the boat." He did not wait for a response. He ushered Serena past them, moving toward the double doors of the boardroom. The wake of his cologne lingered in the air, a mixture of musk and arrogance. As they walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of previous industry innovators, portraits Harrison had commissioned to imply he belonged in their lineage, his mind drifted back to the foundation of this deal. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the same rush he got when he gambled. He thought about the clinical trials for the flagship drug, NeuroV. The data had been messy. The test subjects in the control group had shown signs of aggressive cognitive decline after 6 months. It would have taken 5 years to fix the molecule. Harrison did not have 5 years. He had 5 months of cash flow left. So, he had done what he considered to be the executive decision. He had truncated the data set. He excluded the outliers. He smoothed the curve. In his mind, it was not fraud. It was optimization. He told himself that once Ethelgard bought the company and infused it with capital, he would hire better scientists to fix the problem quietly. No one would ever know. He was saving the company. Really, he was a hero. He glanced at the leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Inside was the falsified report, printed on high-gloss paper, binding the lie into something tangible and authoritative. He felt invincible. He had fooled the FDA auditors. He had fooled his own compliance officer, and he was about to fool a faceless Swiss conglomerate. "Harry," Serena whispered, tugging gently on his sleeve. She had stopped walking and was looking at a summary sheet on the clipboard she had been given. "What is it?" "We are almost there," Harrison hissed, impatient. "This number here." She pointed a manicured finger at the projected revenue column for the third quarter. "It says 40 million from the licensing deal in Brazil. But I remember you saying on the phone last week that the Brazil deal fell through because of the regulatory changes. Why is it still in the projection?" Harrison stopped. He looked down at her, annoyed that she had actually read the paper. He had given it to her as a prop, not reading material. "Serena, look at me," he said, his voice condescendingly soft. "Financial projections are fluid. We keep the Brazil numbers in as a placeholder for anticipated revenue from other markets. It is standard accounting practice. It is called optimistic forecasting." "But isn't that lying?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "If the buyer checks, the buyer is not going to check the line items of a projected quarter for a subsidiary market," Harrison snapped, cutting her off. "You are focusing on the crumbs when you should be looking at the cake. You are too timid. Serena, that is your problem. You think small. In this world, you have to create your own reality. If I say the money is there, the money is there. Do not undermine me in that room. You sit, you nod, and you look expensive. Do you understand?" Serena bit her lip, shrinking back slightly. "Okay, Harry, I am sorry. I just do not want us to get in trouble." "There is no trouble. There is only success," Harrison declared. They reached the end of the hall. The double doors to the boardroom were formidable, made of dark mahogany that absorbed the light. They looked like the gates to a fortress. Harrison adjusted his tie one last time. He checked his reflection in the polished brass handle. He saw a billionaire. He saw a visionary. He saw a man who had won the game of life. He reached out and pushed the doors open. The air inside the boardroom was significantly colder than the hallway. It smelled of lemon polish and ozone. The massive table, carved from a single slab of black oak, dominated the room like a sarcophagus. It was sleek, dark, and imposing. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he believed he owned, but in here, the light seemed dimmed, filtered through some unseen heavy atmosphere. At the far end of the table, the representatives from Ethelgard were already waiting, their backs to the view, their faces in shadow. Harrison stepped across the threshold, his shoes clicking loudly on the stone floor, pulling Serena along with him into the belly of the beast. He had no idea that he wasn't walking into a negotiation. He was walking into an autopsy, and he was the cadaver. I stood in the hushed anteroom just outside the double mahogany doors, listening to the silence. It was a heavy, expensive silence, the kind that usually precedes the shifting of tectonic plates in the business world. My reflection in the darkened glass of the corridor wall showed a woman I had kept hidden for nearly 15 years. Gone was the floral apron, the sensible shoes, and the hair pulled back in a messy bun to accommodate a frantic morning of school runs. In her place stood a stranger, or perhaps the truest version of myself. I wore a white suit, custom-tailored in Milan, the fabric crisp and sharp enough to draw blood. My hair fell in calculated, glossy waves around my shoulders, a mane of dark red that caught the light like polished copper. My makeup was not the soft, natural look Harrison preferred, but precise and striking, with a lip color that bordered on dangerous. I checked my watch, a Patek Philippe that Harrison believed was a high-quality replica because he could not conceive of his wife affording the real thing. It was time. I nodded to Silas, my lead counsel. He was a man of terrifying stature, 6 feet 4 inches of brooding intellect wrapped in a charcoal suit. He signaled to his team. This was the vanguard. I wanted Harrison to feel the pressure before he saw the face of his executioner. The doors swung open, and my legal team marched in. There were 12 of them, moving in a synchronized phalanx of black wool and leather briefcases. They did not look like lawyers. They looked like undertakers coming to collect a body that was still warm. I waited in the shadows of the hallway, just out of sight, letting the scene inside the boardroom curdle. I could picture it perfectly. Harrison would be standing at the head of the table, his chest puffed out, likely flanked by Serena in her teal dress. He would be expecting a handshake from a Swiss diplomat, a polite exchange of pleasantries, and a glass of champagne. Instead, he was being swarmed by a legal army that silently lined the walls. Surrounding the table without saying a word, I counted down in my head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I stepped into the light. I walked through the open doors. The sound of my heels on the black marble floor was deliberate. Click, click, click. It was a slow, rhythmic percussion that cut through the tension in the room like a metronome counting down to an explosion. Time seemed to warp, slowing down into a thick, syrupy crawl. This is what they call the moment of cognitive dissonance. I saw the scene in panoramic detail, every micro-expression magnified. The boardroom was vast and cold, the air conditioning humming a low, ominous note. The board members, men I had cooked dinner for, men whose wives I had comforted during scandals, sat frozen in their leather chairs. They looked like statues in a museum of corporate greed. And then there was Harrison. He was standing at the far end of the table, his hand half extended toward Silas, a confused smile plastering his face. When he heard my footsteps, he turned. The expression that crossed his face was a masterpiece of confusion. First, there was recognition, but it was the wrong kind. He saw his wife. He saw the woman who packed lunchboxes and separated the recycling. But his brain could not reconcile that image with the woman striding toward him in a power suit that cost more than his first car. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to clear a glitch in his vision. Next came the annoyance. I saw his jaw tighten. He thought I was here to embarrass him. He thought I had found out about the affair and had chosen this moment, of all moments, to stage a hysterical domestic intervention. He looked at Serena, panic flaring in his eyes, then back at me. He opened his mouth, and I could practically read the script running through his mind. Go home. Juniper, you are drunk. You are crazy. He took a step toward me, his hand raising in a dismissive gesture, ready to signal security. Juniper, his voice cracked, pitching higher than usual. What the hell are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. You need to leave. Now. He looked around the room, offering an apologetic grimace to the board members. Gentlemen, I apologize. My wife has been under a lot of stress lately. I will handle this. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes narrowing with venom. Get out, he hissed, low enough so the others wouldn't hear the threat, but loud enough for me. Go home and wait for me. We will talk about this later. I did not stop walking. I did not blink. I did not smile. I simply kept moving toward him, my eyes locked on his, stripping away every layer of his arrogance until he was just a small, frightened man in a borrowed suit. Serena, standing to his right, looked like she had stopped breathing. Her hands were clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She stared at me, then at Harrison, then back at me. She recognized the predator in the room, even if Harrison was too blind to see it. Just as Harrison reached for his phone to call security, Silas stepped forward. His voice boomed through the room, a deep baritone that demanded absolute submission. Mr. Thorne, Silas said, stepping between Harrison and me. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the protocol. Harrison flushed red. The misunderstanding is that my wife is currently trespassing in a level 10 security zone. Remove her, or I will have you all escorted out by the police. Silas did not flinch. He turned slightly, extending a hand toward me with the reverence one reserves for royalty. Gentlemen of the board, Silas announced, his voice ringing off the glass walls. It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the founding chairman of Ethelgard Holdings. Harrison froze. The color drained from his face so fast, It looked like the blood had simply evaporated. His mouth hung slightly open, a silent O of disbelief. Silas continued, savoring every syllable. And, as of the transaction completed 3 minutes ago, the absolute owner of Thorn Dynamis Ms. Juniper Hollis. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then, the room exploded into a collective gasp. It was a physical wave of shock. Chairs scraped against the floor as board members shifted, their eyes darting between Harrison and me. Serena let out a small, strangled sound. The Mont Blanc pen she had been holding, Harrison's pen, slipped from her sweating fingers. It hit the table with a loud clatter, rolled across the polished wood, and fell to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Harrison looked at me, really looked at me. The confusion was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrific comprehension. He looked at the suit. He looked at the legal team. He looked at the confidence radiating off me like heat. The pieces of the puzzle were slamming into place in his mind, but the picture they formed was too terrifying for him to accept. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That is impossible. You make cupcakes. You are Juniper." I stopped at the head of the table. This was his seat, the seat of the CEO, the throne he had built for himself. "Excuse me, Harrison," I said. My voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly polite. "You are in my chair." He stood there, rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of the moment. He looked at Marcus Vance, the director of operations. Marcus was staring at me with a look of awe and dawning respect. He looked at the other board members. They were already looking away from Harrison, distancing themselves from the corpse in the room. "Move," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command spoken with the weight of 51% controlling interest. Harrison stumbled back, his legs hitting the chair behind him. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He drifted to the side, purposeless, stripped of his gravity. I sat down. The leather chair was still warm from his body. I adjusted the height, lifting myself slightly higher. I placed my hands on the black oak table, interlocking my fingers. I looked down the length of the table, meeting the eyes of every man who had ever dismissed me. Every executive who had laughed at Harrison's jokes about his simple wife. They quickly looked down at their notepads. Finally, I turned my gaze to Harrison. He was standing awkwardly by the window, next to a trembling Serena. He looked small. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of the wolf he thought he was. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I know we have a lot to get through today. The acquisition, the restructuring, the audit." I paused, letting the word audit hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Harrison flinched. "But first," I continued, leaning forward slightly, my eyes locking onto him with a predatory intensity, "I think we need to discuss the definition of dental insurance that you signed this morning. You see, when you signed that waiver without reading it, you did not just authorize a cleaning for Leo and Maya." I reached into my briefcase, a sleek, white leather case that matched my suit, and pulled out the document. I slid it down the table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of him. "You accepted personal liability for every single debt this company has incurred over the last 10 years, I said softly, "including the ones you thought you had hidden." Harrison stared at the document. His hands began to shake. He looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, he did not see a wife. He saw the end of his world. "Shall we begin?" I asked. The room was mine. The game was mine. And Harrison Thorne was just beginning to realize that he was never the player. He was merely the pawn I had allowed to cross the board until he was exactly where I wanted him. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop, and the massive projection screen behind me flickered to life. The room dimmed, casting a blue artificial glow over the terrified faces of my husband and his mistress. Harrison was still standing, his hands gripping the back of the leather chair I now occupied, his knuckles white. He looked like a man trying to hold onto a cliff edge during an earthquake. "Please, sit down." "Harrison," I said, gesturing to an empty chair at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for junior associates. "You are blocking the view." He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the screen, but the fight had temporarily drained out of him. He sank into the chair, looking small and defeated. Serena sat beside him, shrinking into herself, terrified that any sudden movement might cause her to disintegrate. "Let us discuss the foundation of Thorn Dynamis," I began, my voice steady and commanding. "Harrison, you have spent the last decade telling anyone who would listen that you built this company from nothing. You claimed it was your genius that identified the gap in the gene editing market. You told Forbes magazine that you were a visionary." I clicked a button. The screen displayed a complex diagram of a gene sequence, labeled patent number 8942. "Does this look familiar?" I asked. Harrison squinted at the screen. "That is the core sequence for our NeuroV prototype. It is our proprietary technology." "It is proprietary," I corrected him, "but it is not yours, and it certainly is not something you invented." I stood up and walked slowly toward the screen. "You always used to make fun of my grandmother. Nana Rose, you called her a senile old woman who smelled of lavender and mothballs. You told your friends at the club that I was lucky to inherit her cookie jar money so I could buy nice curtains." I turned to face him. Nana Rose was Dr. Rose Sterling. She was one of the lead biophysicists at the Vanguard Institute in the 1970s. She did not bake cookies. Harrison. She wrote the foundational algorithms for synthetic genomic sequencing. When she died, she did not leave me cash. She left me a portfolio of 17 dormant patents. Patents that you, in your infinite wisdom, decided to infringe upon because you assumed they were public domain. A murmur went through the room. Marcus Vance adjusted his glasses, looking at the screen with renewed interest. "You stole from my grandmother," I said, letting the words land like stones. "You built your entire empire on intellectual property that belongs to the Sterling Trust, my trust." Harrison shook his head, a nervous laugh bubbling up from his throat. "That is ridiculous, even if that were true. The company has been funded by top-tier investors. We have raised over $50 million in the last 5 years alone. Investors do their due diligence. They would have known." "Ah, the investors," I said, a cruel smile playing on my lips. "Let us talk about them." I clicked the remote again. A list of company names appeared. Orion Ventures, Vesta Capital, the North Star Group. "You were always so proud of your ability to raise capital," I continued. "You would come home, drunk on champagne, bragging about how you charmed these mysterious angel investors into writing checks when the banks turned you down. You called yourself the Rainmaker." I walked back to the head of the table and leaned in close to him. "Harrison, there was no rain. There was only me." He blinked. "What?" "I am Orion Ventures. I am Vesta Capital. I am the North Star Group," I revealed. "Every single time your company was about to go under because of your mismanagement, your lavish spending, or your incompetence, I was the one who bailed you out. I created shell companies, routed the funds through the Cayman Islands and Delaware, and injected my own inheritance money back into your business. I bought your debt. I own your equity. I own the mortgage on this building. I own the lease on your car." "But how?" Harrison stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You do not know anything about finance. You do not know how to structure a shell company. You are—" "I am what?" I challenged him. "A housewife? A mother? A woman who likes to paint watercolors?" I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out a framed diploma. I set it down on the table with a sharp thud. "Meet Dr. Juniper Hollis," I said. "Ph.D. in Applied Mathematics from MIT, class of 2005. I graduated top of my class 2 years before we met." The silence in the room was absolute. Harrison stared at the diploma as if it were an alien artifact. "You never asked," I said simply. "In 15 years of marriage, you never once asked me about my education. You assumed that because I stayed home to raise our children, My brain had atrophied. You assumed that because I was soft with our kids. I was soft in business. While you were out playing golf and cheating on me, I was running a multinational holding company from the guest bedroom. I managed the Ethelgard portfolio between breastfeedings and PTA meetings. I built a billion-dollar hedge fund while you were struggling to balance a ledger. Harrison's face turned a violent shade of purple. The humiliation was physical. I could see it burning him. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "It does not matter," he shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "It does not matter if you are a genius or a housewife. We are married. Juniper, this is New York. We do not have separate property laws like some other states. Everything you made during our marriage is marital assets. Half of Ethelgard is mine. Half of your patents are mine. You just played yourself. You just admitted that our joint estate is worth billions. I will divorce you, and I will take half of everything." He looked around the room, seeking validation from the board members. "Did you hear that? She just admitted she's been hiding assets. That is fraud. I will take her for every penny." I did not yell. I did not argue. I simply looked at Silas. Silas reached into his folder and extracted a single, yellowed piece of paper. It was creased down the middle, the edges slightly worn. He slid it across the table to Harrison. "Do you recognize this, Mr. Thorne?" Silas asked in his deep, rumbling voice. Harrison looked down. He frowned. Then his eyes widened in horror. "The prenuptial agreement," I said softly. "You made me sign this," I reminded him. "Think back. Harrison, 19 years ago, you had just started your first company. You had about $40,000 in a savings account and a used Porsche. I had nothing but student loans and a box of my grandmother's old papers. You were so terrified that I was a gold digger. You were so paranoid that I was after your precious $40,000. I stood up and recited the clause from memory. Article 4, Section B. Any and all assets acquired through inheritance or derived from the investment of said inheritance shall remain the sole and separate property of the beneficiary, regardless of the duration of the marriage or the commingling of other funds. You insisted on that clause, I said, watching the hope die in his eyes. You forced me to go to a notary on a rainy Tuesday because you wanted to make sure I could never touch your money. You wanted to protect yourself. And you did. You protected me from you. Since Ethelgard and all my investments were seeded with Nana Rose's patent royalties, I explained, they are all covered under Article 4. You do not own half. Harrison, you do not own a single %. You own nothing. Harrison collapsed back into his chair. He looked physically ill. The board members were exchanging glances, some of them hiding smiles. They had all been victims of Harrison's arrogance at some point, and seeing him dismantled by his own greed was a spectacle they clearly enjoyed. Now, I said, turning my attention to the woman shivering beside him, let us address the strategic advisor. Serena flinched as if I had slapped her. She looked up, her eyes wide with tears, the oversized glasses now looking ridiculous on her face. Serena Blair, I said, reading from a dossier Silas had handed me. According to Harrison, you are a summa cum laude graduate of Harvard Business School with a specialty in bioethics. I clicked the remote. The screen changed. It showed 2 documents side by side. On the left was the fake resume Harrison had undoubtedly paid a forger to create. On the right was an employment application form, handwritten in glittery purple ink. Harvard registrar has no record of a Serena Blair, I stated. However, the Sapphire Lounge in Las Vegas certainly remembers you. The image on the screen zoomed in on the employment history. Position: bottle service waitress. Dates of employment: 2023 to 2025. You met Harrison at a convention last year, I said, dissecting her life with clinical precision. He was drunk at a blackjack table. You brought him a gin and tonic. He tipped you $500 and told you he could make you a star. Isn't that right? Serena began to sob. her hands covering her face. "He told me he was separated," she wailed. "He told me you were crazy. He said I had potential." "He lied to you, Serena," I said, not unkindly. "Just like he lied to everyone in this room. You are not a strategic advisor. You are a prop. He dressed you up in a teal dress and gave you a clipboard because he needed an audience for his ego. He put you in a room with men who have dedicated their lives to science and business, and he expected you to play pretend." I looked at the board members. "Gentlemen, this is the judgment of your CEO. He brings a waitress with 0 clearance and 0 qualifications into a level 10 security meeting because he wants to show off. He handed her confidential financial data that she could not possibly understand. He exposed this company to massive liability just to impress a mistress he picked up in a casino." The look on Marcus Vance's face was one of pure disgust. He turned to Harrison, his voice dripping with ice. "You gave a civilian access to the Helix protocols? Harrison, that is grounds for immediate termination with cause. That is criminal negligence." Harrison looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "She didn't know. She doesn't understand any of it. It was harmless. It was reckless," I snapped. "And it is over." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city that Harrison thought was his kingdom. "Harrison Thorne, you are a fraud," I said, my back to him. "You are a fraud as a businessman. You are a fraud as a husband, and you are a fraud as a father. You have spent your life climbing a ladder that I was holding for you, and you never once looked down to see who was supporting your weight." I turned back to face the room. "The game is up. Thorne Dynamis is no longer a playground for your vanity. It is now a subsidiary of Ethelgard Holdings, my company, my rules." I sat back down in the CEO's chair and folded my hands. "Now, let us move on to the financials, specifically, the embezzlement. I believe we have some very interesting credit card statements to review." Harrison looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal. He knew what was coming next. He knew that the humiliation was only the appetizer. The main course was going to be his total destruction, and I had a very healthy appetite. The emotional undressing was complete. Now it was time for the financial evisceration. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. In the world of high finance, a raised voice implies a loss of control, whereas a spreadsheet is a weapon of mass destruction. I tapped the right arrow key on my laptop, and the screen behind me shifted from the embarrassing revelation of Serena's employment history to a complex, multi-layered flowchart titled Project Phoenix. Harrison blinked, his eyes trying to adjust to the dense web of red lines connecting various offshore accounts. He knew the name, of course. Project Phoenix was his pet project, his secret garden. He had told the board it was a Black Ops research division developing a cure for early-onset Alzheimer's. He had told me, on the rare occasions he spoke about work at dinner, that it was the initiative that would win him the Nobel Prize. "Let us discuss the anatomy of a lie," I said, stepping away from the podium to stand directly in front of the projection. The light from the projector cast the red lines across my white suit, making it look as though I were bleeding, or perhaps as though I were the one drawing blood. "Project Phoenix," I began, my voice devoid of warmth, "was presented to the shareholders as a covert R&D facility in Nevada. According to the ledgers, Thorne Dynamis has funneled exactly $4,200,000 into this project over the last 18 months. I turned to Marcus Vance, who was looking at the screen with a furrowed brow. "Marcus, you are the director of operations," I said. "Have you ever seen a status report from the Nevada facility?" Marcus shook his head slowly. Harrison always said it was strictly need to know. He handled the vendor payments personally to protect the intellectual property. "There is no Nevada facility," I stated flatly. "There is no lab. There are no scientists. There is no cure for Alzheimer's being developed under that budget code. Project Phoenix is a shell corporation registered in the Seychelles. And do you know who the primary beneficiary of that account is?" I clicked the remote. A bank statement appeared on the screen, magnified, so that every zero was visible. The funds flow from Thorn Dynamis to Phoenix Holdings, and then, invariably, they are wired to luxury car dealerships, real estate management firms, and high-end jewelry appraisers. I explained. This is not research and development. Harrison, this is grand larceny. This is money laundering. Harrison sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at the screen, then at the board members, whose expressions had shifted from shock to cold. Hard fury. "That is a lie," Harrison shouted, his voice cracking. "Those were operational expenses. We needed secure transport. We needed safe houses for the data." "Safe houses?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Let us examine these operational necessities." I clicked again. A photograph appeared on the screen. It was a stunning, modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Unit 4B at the Soho Lofts, I read from the lease agreement displayed next to the photo. Rent is $18,000 a month. Paid for by Project Phoenix. Occupant listed, Ms. Serena Blair. I turned my gaze to Serena. She was trembling so violently that her chair was vibrating against the floor. She pulled her teal dress tighter around herself, as if the fabric could shield her from the criminal charges piling up in the air. "And the transport," I continued, clicking to the next slide. It showed an invoice for a McLaren 720S, matte black, $350,000, registered to a private LLC controlled by Harrison Thorne. "Tell me, Harrison, does the cure for Alzheimer's require 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds? The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan. "But my personal favorite," I said, walking slowly towards Serena until I was standing right beside her, "is the item listed under Diplomatic Entertainment Expenses on the corporate Amex." I looked down at Serena's hand, which was clutching the armrest. On her ring finger sat a diamond that was aggressively large, a pear-shaped stone that caught the overhead lights. "That is a beautiful ring, Serena," I said softly. 3 carats, VVS, 1 clarity, platinum setting. It cost $42,000. Serena looked at the ring, then at me, horror dawning in her eyes. "Harrison told you he bought it with his bonus, didn't he?" I asked. "He told you it was a symbol of his love, a promise of the future." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried enough venom to kill. "He bought it with stolen money, Serena. He bought it with the company's money, which means he bought it with my money, strictly speaking. That ring is company property. You are not wearing a symbol of love. You are wearing evidence." Serena gasped and tried to pull the ring off her finger, but her hands were shaking too much. "And you know what the law says about receiving stolen property," I continued, straightening up and addressing the room. "Ignorance is not a defense when the beneficiary is also on the payroll as a fake consultant. Serena, you are not just the mistress. You are an accomplice to embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The IRS does not care if you thought he was rich. They only care that you spent the money." Serena let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound. "I didn't know. I swear. He told me he owned everything. He said the company paid for his lifestyle because he was the founder." "He lied," I said simply. Harrison slammed his fist on the table, finding his voice at last. "This is a setup. You cooked the books. I did not sign off on these transfers. It was Miller. It was the CFO. Miller has been handling the accounts for 5 years. He must have been skimming off the top and setting me up to take the fall." Harrison stood up, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get Miller in here. He will tell you. He has access to my digital signature. He must have forged it." I let him scream. I let him expend that last burst of desperate energy. When he was finished, panting and red-faced, I looked at him with pity. "Sit down, Harrison," I said. "Gary Miller is not coming." "Why? Did he run?" Harrison asked, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "See? I told you. He fled the country. No, I corrected him. Gary Miller is currently at the Four Seasons, enjoying a very expensive lunch on my tab. He is not here because he turned state's witness last Tuesday. Harrison's knees gave out. He collapsed back into his chair. You see, I explained, Gary is a smart man. He saw the discrepancies 6 months ago. He knew you were draining the accounts. He was terrified he would go to prison for you. So, when I approached him, anonymously at first, then in person, he was more than happy to cooperate. He gave me everything. Harrison, every email, every unauthorized wire transfer, every forged receipt. He has been recording your conversations for 3 weeks. I paused to let that sink in. He has you on tape explaining to him how to categorize the Maldives trip, the one you took with Serena last November, as an off-site leadership summit. That trip alone cost the company $65,000. Gary begged you not to do it. You told him to, and I quote, "Cook the books or find a new job." Harrison stared at the table. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. But the embezzlement is actually the least of your problems, I said, walking back to the head of the table. Because embezzlement usually just means prison. It does not necessarily mean bankruptcy. You might have thought you could serve a few years in a minimum security camp and come out to enjoy your hidden assets. I picked up the document from earlier, the one Harrison had signed this morning in our kitchen, thinking it was a dental insurance form for our children. Remember this? I asked, holding it up. Harrison looked at it with dull eyes. The insurance form. It is titled Voluntary Assumption of Corporate Liability, I corrected him. It is a standard document used when a parent company absorbs a subsidiary, but with a twist. By signing this, you, Harrison Thorne, acting as the CEO of Thorne Dynamis, agreed to personally indemnify Ethelgard Holdings against any and all pre-existing debts, liabilities, and legal penalties incurred by Thorne Dynamis prior to the acquisition. I placed the document on the table and smoothed it out. In layman's terms, I said, my voice sharp as a scalpel, it means that the $4 million you stole for Project Phoenix, you owe that back to the company. The mortgage on this building, that is now your personal debt. The penalties we are about to pay to the FDA for your falsified drug trials, your debt. I did the math aloud, counting on my fingers. The embezzlement total is roughly $5 million. The regulatory fines will be around $6 million. The breach of contract suits from the vendors you stiffed add another $4 million. I looked him dead in the eye. Harrison, as of this morning, you personally owe me $15 million. The room was deathly quiet. Harrison looked as if he might vomit. He realized, finally, the trap that had been set. He wasn't just fired, he was destitute. He would spend the rest of his life working to pay off a debt he could never clear. You set me up, he whispered. You tricked me. I gave you a pen, I replied cold-bloodedly. You chose not to read. That is not a trick. Harrison, that is natural selection. I turned to the rest of the room. My demeanor shifted instantly from prosecutor to executive. Gentlemen, I addressed the board members and the senior staff. I have reviewed the internal communications. I know exactly who among you looked the other way while Harrison looted this company. I know who accepted the bonuses to keep quiet about the fake drug trials. I pointed to Elias, the silver-haired board member. Elias, you knew about Project Phoenix. You signed off on the audit exemption. I pointed to the VP of sales. And you knew the Brazil numbers were fake. Get out, I said quietly. All of you. Security is waiting in the hall with your severance packages, which consist entirely of an agreement not to prosecute you if you walk away quietly right now. Leave your phones. Leave your laptops. Get out of my building. There was a scramble. Men who had been captains of industry 5 minutes ago were tripping over themselves to get to the door. They didn't look back. They grabbed their coats and fled, terrified that I might produce another spreadsheet with their names on it. Within 30 seconds. The boardroom was empty, except for 3 people. Me, sitting at the head of the table, Harrison, slumped in his chair, a ruin of a man, and Serena, weeping silently into her hands. the diamond ring heavy on her finger. "Harrison, Serena," I said, checking my watch. "Do not get up. We are not finished yet. The audience has left, but the real show is just beginning." The silence that descended upon the boardroom after the exodus of the executive team was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum, the kind that exists solely to be filled by panic. I remained seated at the head of the black oak table, the leather of the CEO's chair cool against my back. I reached for the porcelain teapot that had been left on the side credenza, part of the catering spread Harrison had ordered for his victory lap, and poured myself a cup of Earl Grey. The steam rose in a delicate spiral. The only thing in the room that was light and unburdened. Harrison sat to my right, slumped and gray-faced, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Serena sat to his right, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that did not lead to a prison cell. They were alone with me now. The audience was gone. The performance was over. Now came the reckoning. I took a slow, deliberate sip of tea, letting the ceramic clink softly against the saucer as I set it down. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. "So," I said, turning my gaze exclusively to Serena. I did not look at Harrison. He was already broken. He just didn't know the extent of the damage yet. Serena, however, was a variable that needed to be solved. "Serena," I said, my voice conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I have been reviewing the federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Given the amount of money involved, over $5 million in tangible assets and cash transfers, you are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence. I would estimate 5 to 8 years in a federal correctional facility. And since you are not a first-time offender, given your record of petty theft in Nevada that my investigators uncovered, the judge is unlikely to be lenient." Serena let out a whimpering sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining the flawless makeup she had applied hours earlier to impress the Swiss investors. "I am 24, she choked out. "I cannot go to prison. Please, I have a life." "You had a life," I corrected her gently. "Now you have a criminal record. Unless—" I let the word hang there. I saw her head snap up. The desperation in her eyes was primal. It was the look of a drowning rat seeing a piece of driftwood. "Unless what?" she gasped. "I will do anything. Please, Mrs. Thorne, I mean. Ms. Hollis, I will do anything." "Unless you can prove that you were a victim of coercion," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "If you were to testify that Harrison Thorne, a man twice your age and in a position of power, manipulated you, lied to you about the legality of the funds, and forced you to accept these gifts as a condition of your employment, then the district attorney might be willing to view you as a witness rather than a defendant." I did not have to wait for the sentence to finish leaving my lips. The transformation was instantaneous. It was a masterclass in behavioral psychology. When survival is on the line, loyalty is the first casualty. The love, the passion, the us against the world narrative that Harrison and Serena had constructed. It all evaporated the moment the handcuffs became a real possibility. Serena turned on Harrison with the speed of a viper. "He did!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "It was him! He told me it was all legal. He told me the company paid for everything and that it was part of his compensation package. I swear I asked him if we should be using the corporate card for the trip to the Maldives. And he told me to shut up and enjoy the view. He said I was stupid for worrying." Harrison's head jerked up. He looked at Serena with a mixture of shock and betrayal that would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. "Excuse me?" Harrison sputtered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You begged for that trip. You showed me the pictures on Instagram every night for a month. You said you wouldn't sleep with me unless I took you somewhere expensive." "I never said that," Serena shrieked. Standing up, her chair scraped violently against the floor. "You are a liar. You told me you were a billionaire. You told me you were going to divorce her because she was boring and frumpy. You used me. Harrison, you just wanted a trophy to show off to your friends because you are insecure about being old. Insecure? Harrison roared, jumping to his feet. He looked ready to strangle her. I made you! You were serving cheap vodka in a dive bar when I found you. You were wearing knockoff shoes and living in a studio apartment with 3 roommates. I gave you a penthouse. I gave you a career. And now you are going to throw me under the bus to save your own skin? You are nothing but a gold digger. Serena, I should have listened to everyone who told me you were trash. And you are a fraud. Serena yelled back, spit flying from her mouth. At least I know who I am. You are a fake. You are not a CEO. You are a thief. You stole money from your own wife. You are pathetic. You couldn't even satisfy me in bed. I had to fake it every single time just to get the credit card. The room went deadly silent again. Harrison looked as if he had been shot in the chest. The accusation about his virility hit him harder than the accusation about the embezzlement. It struck at the very core of his fragile masculinity. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stood there, gaping, destroyed by the woman he had risked his entire life to impress. I sat there, watching them tear each other apart. I took another sip of my tea. It was still warm. This was the true revenge. Bankrupting Harrison was necessary. But destroying the illusion of his grand romance? That was satisfaction. I wanted him to see that Serena never loved him. I wanted Serena to see that Harrison would sacrifice her in a heartbeat. I wanted them to see each other clearly, stripped of the glamour and the money, as the ugly, selfish creatures they were. That is enough, I said calmly. They both stopped, panting heavily, their chests heaving. They looked at me, remembering suddenly that I was the one holding the gavel. It is fascinating to watch true love blossom, I noted dryly. But we have business to conclude. Serena, since you have admitted that the items in your possession were purchased with company funds without your knowledge of their illicit origin, I assume you are willing to return them immediately to mitigate your sentence? Yes, Serena said quickly, nodding her head vigorously. Yes, take them. I do not want them. I just want to go. Excellent, I said. I pressed a button on the intercom system built into the table. Security, please come in. The doors opened, and 2 large security guards entered. They were not the usual lobby guards. These were private contractors I had brought in. They were professional, impassive, and efficient. The lady is returning company property, I told them. Please assist her. I pulled a list from my folder. Item 1, the Hermes Birkin bag, ostrich leather, valued at $35,000, purchased with the corporate American Express on October 4th. I looked at the bag sitting on the table next to Serena. She grabbed it and shoved it toward the guard. Take it. Item 2, I continued, consulting the list. Cartier tank watch, gold and diamond pave, valued at $28,000, purchased November 12th. Serena fumbled with the clasp on her wrist. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get it open. The guard stepped forward and waited patiently until she managed to undo it. She dropped it into the evidence bag he was holding. Item 3, I read. Van Cleef & Arpels necklace, vintage Alhambra, valued at $16,000. She unclasped it from her neck, leaving a red mark on her skin where she pulled too hard. And finally, I said, looking under the table, the shoes, Christian Louboutin, so Kate 120 millimeters, teal suede to match the dress, valued at $895. Serena froze. She looked down at her feet. My shoes? They were purchased on the company account. Serena, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. Asset recovery is a strict process. We cannot allow you to walk out of here with stolen property. But I cannot walk out barefoot, she stammered, looking at the cold marble floor. It is the middle of the city. It is unsanitary. Please. You should have thought about that before you spent $40,000 of my money on a ring, I replied. The shoes, Serena. She looked at Harrison for help. He turned his face away, refusing to meet her eyes. He was done with her. She let out a sob of pure humiliation. Slowly, she bent down and slipped off the heels. She stood up, sinking 3 inches in height, her bare feet looking pale and vulnerable against the dark stone floor. "Escort Ms. Blair out of the building," I ordered the guards. "Do not let her stop at the lobby. Escort her directly to the sidewalk." The guard took her by the arm, not roughly, but firmly. Serena Blair. The woman who had walked in here thinking she was the queen of the castle was marched out with nothing but the cheap teal dress on her back and the dirt of the floor on her feet. The doors closed behind her, cutting off her sobbing. Harrison and I were alone. He stood by the window, refusing to look at me. The silence stretched out, thin and taut. Finally, he turned. He looked aged. In the span of 1 hour, he had aged 10 years. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were hollow. "Juniper," he said. His voice was cracked, a shadow of the booming baritone he used to command rooms with. I did not answer. I just watched him. He took a step toward me, then stopped, unsure of the boundaries anymore. "Juniper, I know what I did was wrong. I got caught up. I was weak. I let the pressure get to me. And I made mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling 5 years of systematic fraud?" "I am sorry," he whispered. He fell to his knees. It was a theatrical gesture, one he probably thought would move me. He crawled forward slightly, reaching for my hand, but I pulled it away before he could touch me. "Please," he begged, tears welling up in his eyes. "We have been married for 15 years. We have children. Think of Leo. Think of Maya. You cannot send their father to prison. You cannot destroy our family like this. I will do anything. I will sign a postnup. I will go to therapy. I will cut Serena out of my life completely. You saw. I already did. She means nothing to me." He looked up at me, his face wet with tears. "I am still the man you married. June, I am still the father of your children. Do not destroy me. Please, for the kids." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a cold, clinical detachment. He was playing the only card he had left, the family card. He was using our children as human shields to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. It was the most cowardly thing he had done all day. "Stand up, Harrison," I said sharply. "You look pathetic." He scrambled to his feet, wiping his eyes, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. "You will help me? You will fix this?" "I am thinking of the children," I said, my voice hard as steel. "That is exactly why I'm doing this. If I let you walk away, if I cover this up and let you pretend to be a success, what does that teach them? That lying pays off? That daddy can steal and cheat, and mommy will always clean up the mess?" I stood up and walked around the table until I was standing toe-to-toe with him. "I am going to teach our children a lesson about accountability. Harrison, a lesson you apparently never learned." "So you are firing me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You are kicking me out?" "Fire you?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Oh, no. If I fire you, you just go out into the world and find another unsuspecting victim to con. You get to play the victim, the misunderstood genius who was pushed out by a hostile takeover. No, Harrison, you are not getting off that easy." I picked up the file containing the debt restructuring plan I had drafted with Silas. "You owe this company, you owe me, $15 million, I reminded him. "You are going to pay it back, every single cent." "But I have no money," he cried. "You froze my accounts." "Exactly," I said. "Which is why you are going to work it off. You are not fired. Harrison, you are retained, but not as CEO." I smiled, and it was the coldest thing in the room. "You are going to work for me. You are going to stay in this company, in the building you love so much, and you are going to work every single day until your debt is paid. I have calculated that. Based on a garnishable wage, it should take you roughly 3 lifetimes. but we will start with today. Work? Harrison looked confused. As what? A consultant? We will get to your new title shortly, I said, turning back to the table and gathering my papers. But know this. You are not going to prison because I do not want my children visiting their father behind glass. But do not mistake my mercy for weakness. You belong to me now. Harrison, you are not my husband. You are my debtor, and I am a very demanding creditor. I snapped my briefcase shut. Now, come with me. Let me show you your new office. The fall from grace is rarely a straight line dropped from the heavens. Usually. It is a slow, grinding spiral down a drain, bumping against the sides of one's own humiliation on the way to the sewer. For Harrison Thorne, the descent was literal. It involved an elevator ride past the lobby, past the parking garage, all the way down to a button that most employees did not even know existed. Basement level 2. The doors opened not onto plush carpet or Italian marble, but onto raw concrete stained with decades of industrial grease. The air down here was different. It did not smell of expensive cologne and ozone. It smelled of damp cardboard, cleaning chemicals, and the distinct, metallic tang of despair. This was the bowels of the building, the place where the heating pipes groaned and the internet signal went to die. Harrison stood there on his first day, clutching a cardboard box containing the few personal items I had allowed him to keep: a stapler, a stress ball, and a framed photo of the children that I had removed from its silver frame and placed in a plastic sleeve. He looked at his new kingdom. "This is a joke," he muttered, his voice echoing in the cavernous, dimly lit hallway. "This has to be a joke." It was not a joke. It was his rehabilitation. I had created a new position specifically for him: Inventory Voucher Control Officer. It sounded bureaucratic and dull, which was the point. His office was not a corner suite. It was not even a cubicle. It was a white, folding plastic table, the kind used for backyard barbecues or church potlucks, set up in the hallway directly adjacent to the men's maintenance restroom. Every time the door opened, he would be greeted by the scent of pine disinfectant and the sound of flushing. I watched him from the high-definition security feed in my office 48 floors above. I saw him set his box down on the wobbly table. One of the legs was slightly shorter than the others, requiring him to fold a piece of paper to stabilize it. I had ensured that detail personally. His task was simple, yet diabolical. As part of the forensic audit required to restructure the company's debt, his debt, we needed to digitize 10 years of physical receipts and shipping manifests. Harrison, with his intimate knowledge of the company's creative accounting, was the only one qualified to spot the anomalies. So, he had to sit there, 8 hours a day, and manually type the details of his own fraud into a legacy computer terminal that ran on an operating system from the late 90s. He sat down on the metal folding chair. It was cold. He reached for the first box of files. It was labeled Fiscal Year 2018. He opened it and pulled out a receipt for a client retention dinner at a steakhouse in Midtown. The bill was $4,000. He stared at it. He remembered that dinner. He had not taken a client. He had taken a group of college friends to brag about his IPO launch. He had ordered a magnum of wine. Now, he had to type every single line item into the database. Filet mignon, $100. Truffle fries, $20. It was a psychological mirror. Every keystroke was a reminder of a gluttony he could no longer afford. His life outside the building had undergone a similar restructuring. Since I had seized his assets to cover the lien, Harrison was no longer the master of the penthouse. He was currently residing at the Happy Traveler Inn, a motel in Queens that charged $60 a night and offered complimentary bed bugs. His sleek black Mercedes had been auctioned off 2 weeks ago. Now, Harrison Thorne, the man who once claimed he was allergic to public transport, took the M15 bus to work. I zoomed in on the camera feed. It was lunchtime. In his previous life, this was the hour Harrison would have been sipping a martini at a white tablecloth restaurant. Today, he pulled a styrofoam cup of instant noodles out of his bag. He walked over to the janitor's sink to fill it with lukewarm tap water. As he stood there, waiting for the noodles to soften, the door to the service elevator opened. Two junior IT technicians walked out, carrying a server rack. They were young, wearing hoodies and sneakers, the kind of employees Harrison used to fire for looking poor in the lobby. They stopped when they saw him. Harrison straightened up, trying to summon some of his old authority. He smoothed the lapel of his suit, which was beginning to look shiny at the elbows from overuse. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, his voice tight. "Carry on." The technicians looked at each other. One of them, a boy with messy hair, smirked. "Hey, aren't you Mr. Thorne?" the boy asked. "The guy who bought the invisible car?" The other technicians snickered. "No, dude, it was the invisible lab. The car was real. He just couldn't pay for it." Harrison's face went crimson. "I am the former CEO of this company. I am currently overseeing a critical audit. Show some respect, or I will have you written up." The boys laughed openly now. "Written up by who? You are the inventory guy. Hey, when you are done with those noodles, the bathroom is out of paper towels. Maybe you can restock them." They walked past him, bumping his shoulder as they went. Harrison stood there, holding his soggy cup of noodles, shaking with impotent rage. He was not a ghost. Ghosts are feared. He was a joke. He was the punchline to a corporate anecdote. Up in the lobby, the atmosphere was electric. Giant LED screens, which I had installed to replace Harrison's gloomy oil paintings, broadcasted the real-time success of the newly rebranded Hollis Innovations. The stock ticker was green, climbing steadily. A news segment was playing on a loop, featuring an interview I had given to Bloomberg that morning. In the video, I looked radiant. I spoke about ethical leadership, transparency, and the revolutionary new patent usage that was actually curing diseases instead of just generating hype. Harrison, having finished his sad lunch, had wandered up to the ground floor vending machine, the one in the service corridor, to buy a diet soda. He could see the lobby through the glass partition. He saw my face on the giant screen, larger than life. He saw his former employees, people he had bullied, underpaid, and terrorized, walking with a spring in their step. They were smiling. They were collaborative. The toxic cloud he had hung over the building had lifted, and the sun was shining on everyone but him. He pressed his hand against the glass, watching a group of female executives laughing as they headed out for lunch. One of them was his former personal assistant, a woman he had once made cry because she brought him the wrong brand of sparkling water. She was now the head of human resources. She looked powerful. She looked happy. Harrison turned away, unable to watch. He trudged back to the elevator, pressing the button for the basement. He retreated to his plastic table, his sanctuary of shame. But Harrison was not a man who learned lessons easily. His narcissism was a durable thing, like a cockroach that survives a nuclear blast. As the weeks dragged into months, his despair began to calcify into resentment. He did not see his punishment as justice. He saw it as a temporary setback. He still believed he was the smartest man in the building. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was in a meeting with the new board of directors, the security system flagged an anomaly in the basement. Harrison had stopped typing. He was looking around furtively. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone, a cheap, prepaid device he must have bought at a bodega. He dialed a number, shielding his mouth with his hand, thinking the noise of the ventilation fans would cover his voice. I switched the audio feed in my office to the directional microphone installed above his table. "Connect me to Jonathan Vane," Harrison whispered urgently. Vane was the CEO of Biovance, our direct competitor. Vane was a shark, a man who had been trying to acquire our gene sequencing data for years. "Mr. Vane, it is Harrison Thorne. No, do not hang up. Listen, I am inside. I have access. No. She thinks I am just counting beans. But I am in the system. I can get you the source code for the new Ethelgard merger, the real data. Not the stuff she is releasing to the press." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Yes, I know I have a non-compete, but I also have $15 million of debt and a wife who is trying to bury me. I want out. Jonathan, I will give you the keys to the kingdom for 2 million. Cash. A ticket to Rio. He nodded, a desperate grin spreading across his face. Okay, I will get the files. I will meet you tonight. I will transfer them to a secure drive. He hung up the phone and immediately turned to the computer terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was trying to bypass the inventory software to access the main server. He typed in his old admin password, King Harrison 1. Access denied. He tried again, Thorn Supreme, 2025. Access denied. He tried a backdoor command he had forced the IT department to install years ago for his private monitoring. Command not recognized. Harrison started to sweat. He slammed his hand against the monitor. He didn't realize that the terminal he was using was air-gapped. It was not connected to the intranet. It was not connected to the internet. It was a closed loop, a digital island. He could type data in, but he could not take anything out. The only thing that computer was connected to was a printer in my office. I watched him panic. He crawled under the table, checking the Ethernet cable. He found that the cable had been cut and simply taped to the wall to look connected. He sat back on the floor, surrounded by the dust bunnies of the basement, and let out a scream of frustration. It was a raw, primal sound. He had tried to be the wolf again, only to realize he had been declawed, defanged, and neutered. Meanwhile, miles away from the damp concrete of basement level 2. The sun was setting over our villa in Westchester. The house was warm. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary wafted from the kitchen, not because I was forced to cook it, but because I enjoyed cooking when it wasn't a duty. Leo and Maya were in the living room, building a massive Lego castle. They were laughing. They hadn't asked about their father in weeks. The tension that used to permeate the house, the constant fear of Harrison's moods, the need to be quiet so Daddy could think, was gone. I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, looking at the manicured lawn. I opened my tablet and checked the security feed one last time before dinner. Harrison was still sitting at the plastic table. He had given up on the computer. He was eating a granola bar for dinner. He looked at the framed photo of the children, the one I had left him. He touched the glass. For a second, I thought I saw a moment of genuine regret, but then he picked up the phone again. He wasn't calling the kids. He wasn't calling me to apologize. He was calling his bookie. Hey, it is Harry. Put 50 on the Knicks. I have a feeling my luck is about to turn. I closed the tablet. I felt a profound sense of peace. Some men are tragic figures, brought down by a fatal flaw. Harrison was not tragic. He was just a bad investment that I had finally written off. Mom, dinner, Maya called out. Coming, sweetheart, I replied. I walked back into the light of my home, leaving Harrison in the dark. Exactly where he belonged, for 2 months. Harrison Thorne existed in the purgatory of the sub-basement. I watched him from my office, a silent observer to his slow decomposition. The man who once demanded bottled water from the Fijian aquifer was now drinking lukewarm tap water from a rusted sink. But confinement does strange things to the human psyche. For some, it breaks the spirit completely. For others, specifically the malignant narcissists of the world, it compresses their ego into a diamond-hard stone of resentment. Harrison did not learn humility in the dark. He learned patience, and as it turned out, he also learned how to map the building's forgotten nervous system. It started on a Tuesday. Late in the evening, I was reviewing the quarterly projections in the penthouse office, the city lights shimmering below like a sea of diamonds I had rightfully claimed. Down in the bowels of the building, Harrison was finishing his shift. The security feed showed him pushing a cart of shredded documents toward the compactor room. He stopped. He tilted his head. He was looking at a section of the wall behind the ventilation unit, a spot where the drywall had crumbled slightly from dampness. I zoomed in. He reached out and pulled at a loose panel. Behind it, covered in a decade of gray dust, was a bundle of orange fiber optic cables. I saw the moment of realization hit him. His eyes, usually dull and defeated, suddenly snapped wide open. He recognized the cabling. It was the legacy infrastructure, the physical backbone of the server network installed by the original owners of the building in the late 90s. When I modernized Thorn Dynamis, I had ordered a complete wireless overhaul and cloud migration, but contractors are lazy. They often leave the old copper and fiber lines dormant in the walls, rather than stripping them out. Harrison knew something that he thought I had overlooked. Those orange cables led directly to the physical server room on the 30th floor. Bypassing the modern digital firewalls I had erected around the cloud database, if he could tap into that line, he wouldn't need a password. He would be hardwired into the mainframe for the next week. Harrison was a model employee. He arrived on time. He typed his vouchers. He didn't complain about the smell from the restroom, but I saw the subtle shifts. He was hoarding supplies, a screwdriver stolen from a maintenance cart, a laptop from the recycling pile that was marked for destruction. He managed to stash it in the ceiling tiles of the men's room. He was building a rig. He was hunting for the Gen X formula. I knew exactly what he was after. Gen X was a synthetic protein sequence he had developed in the early days. Before the fraud consumed him, it was brilliant, volatile, and technically, it was the only piece of intellectual property that had never been formally registered under the Ethelgard umbrella because Harrison had kept it on a private, encrypted drive to hide it from the FDA. He believed it was his golden parachute. If he could steal it, he could sell it to Biovance for enough money to buy a new identity and a villa in a country with no extradition treaty. He made his move on a Thursday night in late October. The weather was biblical. A nor'easter was hammering Manhattan, turning the streets into rivers of black sludge. The wind howled against the glass tower, causing the entire structure to groan. It was the perfect cover. The thunder masked the sounds of his movements, and the flickering power grid meant the security sensors were resetting intermittently. At 2 a.m, the building was a tomb. The cleaning crews had finished their shifts. The night guards were stationed in the lobby, drinking coffee and watching the storm, oblivious to the rats scurrying through the walls beneath them. I sat in my office with the lights off, illuminated only by the glow of my monitors. I had a front-row seat to the heist. Harrison moved through the service corridors with a surprising agility. He had shed his cheap suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He looked desperate, sweaty, and alive. He reached the access panel in the basement. Using the stolen screwdriver, he popped the cover off the junction box. He spliced the wires of the salvaged laptop into the orange cable with the precision of a man defusing a bomb. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking with adrenaline. He was tapping into the central nervous system of the company. On my screen, a command prompt appeared. He was in, because the legacy line was internal. It bypassed the biometric authentication. He began the search. Index, Gen X, status, unencrypted. He let out a laugh. The audio pickup in the basement caught it, a dry, rasping sound of pure triumph. He initiated the download. The file was massive, 2 terabytes of raw genomic data. The progress bar crawled across the screen of his stolen laptop. 10%, 20%. Harrison paced the small room, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He pulled out the burner phone, the one he had managed to keep hidden despite my sweep. He dialed a number. "It is happening," he whispered into the phone. "I am at 40%. Get the boat ready." The voice on the other end was garbled, likely a broker he had dug up from his past life in the casino underworld, a man who could turn data into diamonds and diamonds into a passport. "The buyer is waiting at the docks," Harrison said, responding to a question I couldn't hear. "Price is $50 million, non-negotiable. This is the Holy Grail. Vargas, this destroys Ethelgard. This leaves my wife with a shell and gives Biovance the engine." $50 million. That was the price he put on his betrayal. He was willing to hand over a potential cure for leukemia to a predatory competitor just to spite me. The download hit 90%. Outside, a crack of thunder shook the building so hard my coffee cup rattled on the desk. The lights flickered and died for 3 seconds before the backup generators kicked in with a low hum. In the basement, the laptop screen glowed steadily in the darkness. Download complete. Harrison snatched the external hard drive he had plugged into the laptop. He kissed it. He actually kissed the cold plastic. He dismantled his rig in seconds, shoving the laptop back into the ceiling and kicking the loose wires behind the panel. He moved toward the service exit. He had disabled the alarm on the loading dock door using the terminal before he logged off. He was thorough. I had to give him that. When motivated by greed, Harrison was a genius. He slipped out into the storm. I switched my view to the external cameras. A figure in a dark raincoat emerged from the side of the building, instantly drenched by the deluge. He didn't run. He walked with purpose. He climbed into a nondescript sedan that had been idling in the alleyway, his getaway ride. He was free. He had the data. He had the plan. And he had the absolute certainty that he had won. 10 minutes later, my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it ring twice, savoring the moment, before I picked it up. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice sleepy, as if he had woken me up. "Wake up, Juniper." Harrison's voice came through the line, distorted by the static of the storm and his own mania. "I hope you are sleeping well in my bed." "Harrison?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Where are you? The night shift supervisor said you were not at your post." "I am not at my post because I am not your servant anymore," he sneered. "I am the wolf. Juniper. Did you really think you could keep me in a basement? Did you think a plastic table and a minimum wage could hold Harrison Thorne?" "Harrison, come back," I said, injecting a note of panic into my tone. "You are violating your parole. You are violating the debt agreement. If you leave, the police will hunt you down." "Let them try," he shouted, laughing wildly. "I am gone, June, and I took something with me. Something you forgot to lock up. Does the name Gen X ring a bell?" I stayed silent, letting him fill the void with his ego. "That is right," he gloated. "I have it all. The formula, the trials, the synthesis protocols. I am selling it to Biovance tonight. By tomorrow morning, your stock will be worthless. Your Hollis innovations will be a laughingstock, and I will be sipping a mojito on a beach where you cannot touch me." "Harrison, do not do this," I pleaded. "That data is dangerous." "It is only dangerous to you," he spat back, "because it is the bullet that kills your empire. You thought you were so smart, revealing your degree, revealing your secret patents, but you missed the big one. You always underestimated me. That was your fatal flaw. You thought I was a fool." "I never thought you were a fool, Harrison," I said quietly. "I thought you were greedy." "Call it what you want," he yelled. "I am rich again, and you are nothing. Goodbye, Juniper. Do not wait up." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it gently on my desk. I looked out the window at the rain slashing against the city. Somewhere out there, in the belly of that storm, Harrison was speeding toward the docks, clutching a hard drive that he believed was his salvation. He felt powerful. He felt vindicated. He felt like the hero of his own movie. Driving into the sunset after outsmarting the villain, I stood up and smoothed the front of my silk robe. It was time to get dressed. I had an appointment at the docks, and I didn't want to be late. Harrison had found the flaw in the basement because I had left the panel loose. He had found the orange cables because I had instructed the contractors to leave that specific line active. He had downloaded the Gen X file because I had placed it on the Ghost server 3 days ago. He was right about one thing. The data on that drive was explosive, but not in the way he thought. I walked to the elevator, bypassing the button for the basement and pressing the button for the garage. My driver was already waiting. "To the shipyard," I said as I slid into the back of the armored SUV. Harrison had his hope. He had his moment of triumph. He had his phone call. It was cruel. Perhaps, to let a man believe he had escaped the gallows just as the trapdoor was oiling its hinges. But Harrison needed to believe he had won. The fall is always much more devastating when you are standing on a pedestal you built yourself. He was heading to an abandoned warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. He thought he was meeting a broker from Biovance. He thought he was walking into a transaction. He had no idea He was walking into the final act of a play I had written before he even knew the curtain was up. The storm outside was intensifying, thunder rattling the chassis of the car. It was a perfect night for an ending. The warehouse at the Brooklyn Navy Yard was a cathedral of rust and decay. The rain hammered against the corrugated tin roof, creating a deafening industrial symphony that masked the sound of my armored SUV idling in the shadows 300 yards away. Through the rain-slicked windshield, I watched the scene unfold with the detachment of a director watching the final take of a tragedy. Harrison's vehicle, a nondescript sedan he had likely hot-wired or rented with stolen cash, was parked near the loading bay. The headlights cut through the deluge, illuminating the swirling dust and the relentless downpour. He stepped out of the car, clutching the external hard drive to his chest as if it contained the beating heart of his future. He wore a dark raincoat, but he looked small against the backdrop of the towering cranes and the black water of the East River churning nearby. I checked the monitor on my dashboard. It was connected to the body camera worn by the man waiting inside the warehouse. "He is approaching the rendezvous point." I spoke into the comms unit. "Hold your position. Wait for the exchange. I want his fingerprints on the money." "Copy that," the voice crackled back in my ear. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp rot. Harrison walked toward the center of the vast, empty space. A single industrial work light had been set up, casting harsh, long shadows that danced on the concrete floor. Standing under the light was the buyer. Harrison knew him as Mr. Vane's broker, a shadowy figure who facilitated corporate espionage for Biovance. He was a tall man, dressed in a sharp trench coat, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. At his feet sat a large metallic briefcase. "You are late," the buyer said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "The storm," Harrison shouted over the noise of the rain. "And I had to be careful. She is watching everything." "She?" the buyer asked. "My wife." Harrison spat the word out like a curse. "The witch who thinks she owns me. But she missed this. She missed the one thing that matters." Harrison stepped into the circle of light. He looked manic. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his skin pale and clammy. He looked like a junkie about to score the ultimate high. "Do you have the payment?" Harrison demanded, eyeing the briefcase. "Do you have the merchandise?" the buyer countered. Harrison pulled the hard drive from his coat pocket. 2 terabytes, the complete Gen X sequencing, the clinical trial data, the synthesis protocols. "It is all here. This is the key to the next 50 years of biotech. Biovance will own the market by Monday morning." The buyer extended a hand. Harrison hesitated for a fraction of a second, a final, instinctual warning bell ringing in his reptilian brain. But his greed silenced it. He handed over the drive. The buyer took it, pulled a ruggedized laptop from his coat, and plugged the drive in. He typed a few commands. "Decrypting," the buyer muttered. Harrison paced nervously, wiping the rain from his forehead. "It is unencrypted. I took it straight from the legacy server. It is pure," the buyer nodded. "I see the file structure. Project Gen X. It looks authentic." "Of course it is authentic," Harrison yelled, his patience snapping. "I wrote the code. Now, give me the money. We agreed on 50 million, 5 million in cash now. The rest wired to the Cayman account upon confirmation." "The wire is queued," the buyer said calmly. "And the cash is in the case." He kicked the metallic briefcase toward Harrison. It slid across the dusty concrete, coming to a stop at Harrison's feet. Harrison looked down at it. This was it. This was his ticket out of the basement, out of the debt, out of the humiliation. This was his freedom. He knelt down, his hands trembling violently. He popped the latches. Click, click. He threw the lid open. Inside, stacked in neat, tight rows, were bundles of $100 bills, $5 million in untraceable currency. The sight of it seemed to intoxicate him. He reached out and plunged his hands into the money, grabbing a stack, feeling the texture of the paper. He closed his eyes and inhaled sharply, a look of pure ecstasy washing over his face. "I won," he whispered to himself. "I actually won." Do not count it yet, Harrison, I said. My voice did not come from the shadows. It came from the massive PA system installed in the warehouse rafters. It boomed from every direction, loud, distorted, and godlike. Harrison froze. His hands were still buried in the cash. He looked up, his eyes darting around the dark abyss of the warehouse. "Juniper?" he screamed. "Where are you? Show yourself." "Lights," I commanded from the car. Clang, clang, clang. 4 sets of high-intensity stadium floodlights, positioned on the catwalks above, slammed on simultaneously. The sudden brilliance was blinding. It turned the warehouse from a dark cavern into an interrogation room exposed by the power of 1,000 suns. Harrison screamed and threw his hands up to shield his eyes, dropping the money. He stumbled back, blinded and disoriented. The heavy steel doors of the loading bay rolled up with a mechanical roar. I stepped out of the rain and into the warehouse. I was flanked by 2 members of my private security detail, holding umbrellas over my head. But I walked forward until I was standing just inside the circle of light. Harrison blinked, tears streaming from his eyes as they adjusted to the glare. When he focused and saw me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You!" he howled. "You followed me. You put a tracker on the car." I did not need a tracker on the car. "Harrison," I said, my voice calm, amplified by the acoustics of the empty space. "I knew where you were going because I told you where to go." I walked closer, stopping 10 feet away from him. He looked like a trapped rat, cornered and vicious. "You think you stopped me?" He laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "It is too late. He has the drive. The transaction is done. BioVance has the data. Even if you arrest me, the secret is out. I destroyed your company." He pointed at the buyer. "Run. Get the data out of here. Upload it." The buyer did not run. He did not upload anything. He simply closed the laptop, unplugged the hard drive, and stood up. He removed his hat, revealing a face Harrison had never really looked at closely. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Mr. Thorne," the buyer said. He reached into his trench coat. Harrison flinched, expecting a gun. Instead, the man pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. A gold badge caught the reflection of the floodlights. "Special Agent Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation," the man announced. "Cybercrimes and Counter-Espionage Division." Harrison stopped breathing. He looked at the badge, then at the drive, then at me. "FBI?" he whispered. "But BioVance, the broker." "There is no broker," I explained. Stepping closer, "BioVance never returned your calls. Harrison, they know better than to touch stolen IP from a company I own. When you reached out to the black market, you were flagged by my security team immediately." I gestured to the hard drive in Agent Miller's hand. "And that data? The Gen X formula you worked so hard to steal from the basement?" I shook my head, offering him a look of pity. "It is fake, Harrison. It is a decoy file I planted on the legacy server 3 days ago. It contains nothing but random genomic noise and a very aggressive tracking virus that activates the moment it is plugged into a foreign network." "No," Harrison moaned, shaking his head. "I saw the code. I recognized it." "You saw what you wanted to see," I corrected him. "You were so desperate to be the genius again that you didn't check the checksums. You didn't run a simulation. You just grabbed the shiny object and ran." Harrison looked at the suitcase of cash at his feet. "But the money, the 50 million. "Counterfeit," Agent Miller said, kicking the case shut. "Standard bureau props for a sting operation." Harrison fell to his knees. The adrenaline that had sustained him crashed, leaving him hollow. "Why?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Why go to all this trouble? If you knew I was stealing, why didn't you just stop me in the basement? Why let me come all the way here?" "Because, Harrison," I said, my voice hardening, "stealing corporate secrets is a crime. Yes, but it is a white-collar crime. You might have gotten 5 years. You might have gotten probation. That was not enough." I took a step forward, towering over his kneeling form. I needed you to cross a line that you could never come back from. You see, the Gen X technology, the real technology, is currently being reviewed for a contract with the Department of Defense. It has applications in biodefense weaponry. Harrison's mouth fell open. By attempting to sell it to an unauthorized third party, and by believing you were selling it to a foreign-backed competitor, you did not just commit corporate theft, I explained, spelling out his doom. You committed economic espionage under the Economic Espionage Act of 1996, and because of the defense application, you also attempted to traffic in classified national security information. Agent Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Harrison Thorne, Miller recited, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit economic espionage, theft of trade secrets, and wire fraud. You are also being detained under the Patriot Act pending an investigation into the sale of dual-use biological technology. Harrison looked at me, his face crumbling. The Patriot Act? Juniper. That is terrorism charges. That is federal supermax. I will never get out. I gave you a choice, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I gave you a desk in the basement. I gave you a chance to pay your debt, to see your children on weekends, to earn back a sliver of dignity. It was a hard life, yes, but it was a life. But you couldn't do it, I continued. You couldn't handle being ordinary. You had to be the wolf. You had to win. You chose this, Harrison. You chose the warehouse. You chose the betrayal. I just set the stage. You trapped me, he wept. You planned this whole thing. You are a monster. I am a mathematician, I corrected him. I calculate probabilities, and the probability of you betraying me again was 100%. I just wanted to make sure that when you did, it would be the last time. I nodded to Agent Miller. He is all yours. Miller grabbed Harrison by the shoulder and hauled him to his feet. Harrison tried to pull away, lunging toward me, his hands reaching out as if he wanted to strangle me or hug me. I couldn't tell. Juniper, he screamed. Think of the kids. You cannot let them take me to federal prison. Think of Leo. I am thinking of them, I said, not flinching as the agent slammed him against the side of a rusted shipping container. I am making sure their inheritance is safe from you. Suddenly, the warehouse doors behind me burst open. Federal agents, go, go, go! A tactical team swarmed in, dressed in full body armor, weapons drawn. They were not necessary. Miller had him secured, but the show of force was the final nail in Harrison's coffin. Red laser sights danced across his chest. He was shoved against the metal wall, his face pressed into the rust, his hands wrenched behind his back. Click, the sound of the handcuffs locking was final. It was the sound of a book slamming shut. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the circle of light, back into the shadows, back toward the open bay door where the rain was still falling. Juniper! Harrison's voice was fading as they dragged him toward an awaiting armored van. Juniper! I love you. I am sorry. Please. I walked out into the storm. The rain felt cold and clean on my face. My security team held the umbrella over me, but I stepped out from under it for a moment, letting the water wash away the last traces of the wife I used to be. I watched as they loaded him into the van. There were no flashing lights, no sirens. Federal raids of this magnitude happen in the dark. The van doors slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and just like that, Harrison Thorne was gone. The buyer, Agent Miller, walked over to me, wiping the rain from his face. Ms. Hollis, he said, nodding respectfully. That went exactly as you predicted. Variables are easy to predict when they have no moral compass. Agent Miller, I replied. Thank you for your cooperation. Ethelgard will, of course, continue to fully support the Bureau's investigation into the black market data brokers. We appreciate it, Miller said. He is going away for a long time, ma'am. 20 years minimum, likely more. Good, I said. He always did like a corner office. I suppose a 6x8 cell is a corner of sorts. I turned and walked back to my car. My driver opened the door. The leather interior was warm and dry. As we drove away, leaving the Navy Yard behind, I pulled out my phone. I had one text message. It was from the nanny. "Kids are asleep. Maya asked if Daddy is coming to the school play next week. What should I tell her?" I looked at the message for a long time. Then, I typed my reply. "Tell her Daddy has gone away on a very long business trip, but tell her not to worry. Mommy is here, and Mommy isn't going anywhere." I hit send. The car merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city lights. The skyline of Manhattan glittered in the distance, a sprawling empire of steel and ambition. Somewhere in that city was my building, my company, and my future. Harrison had tried to sell it. Now, he would simply be a footnote in its quarterly report. The game was over, the board was clear, and for the first time in 15 years, I was the only player left standing. The gavel came down with a sound that was less like a crack of thunder and more like the dull, final thud of a coffin lid closing. It was over in 3 weeks. The federal justice system, usually a lumbering beast, moved with terrifying speed when presented with the kind of evidence Agent Miller and I had curated. The trial of Harrison Thorne was not the media circus he had likely fantasized about in his narcissistic delusions. It was a clinical dissection of a man who had tried to sell his country for a suitcase of fake cash. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, wearing a navy blue dress, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I watched as Harrison stood to receive his sentence. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion, making him look sallow and diminished. The bespoke Italian suits, the cufflinks, the slicked-back hair, all the armor he had used to protect his fragile ego was gone. "Harrison Thorne," the judge read, looking over her spectacles with a mixture of boredom and disdain, "on the counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, economic espionage, and attempted trafficking of classified defense technology. This court finds you guilty. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, with no eligibility for parole for the first 20 years. 25 years. Harrison did not scream. He did not protest. He simply slumped forward, his forehead touching the wooden table, as if his spine had finally dissolved. He would be 71 years old when he saw the sky without bars again. 2 weeks later, I went to see him. The correctional facility was a gray, brutalist block of concrete an hour north of the city. The visiting room was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on one side of the reinforced glass partition. Picking up the heavy black phone receiver, Harrison shuffled in. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles. He looked 10 years older than he had in the warehouse. His hair was thinning, and there was a nervous tick in his left eye that hadn't been there before. He sat down, picked up the phone, and looked at me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "You came," he said, his voice raspy. "I had to sign the final transfer papers for the car lease." I lied smoothly. "And I wanted to see if the orange suited you. It is a bold color choice." He let out a weak, bitter laugh. "You are cruel, Juniper. I never knew you could be this cruel." "I am not cruel, Harrison," I replied, my voice steady. "I am just thorough." He leaned closer to the glass, his eyes searching my face for something. Regret, maybe, or love. He found neither. "Tell me one thing," he whispered. "Just one thing. When? When did you plan this? Was it when I brought Serena to the meeting? Was it when you found out about the money?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Harrison, it was long before that." I looked down at my hands, remembering a dinner party from 5 years ago. "Do you remember the night of your 40th birthday? You were drunk. You were bragging to your college friends on the patio. You didn't know I was standing by the screen door with the cake." Harrison frowned, trying to remember. "You told them," I continued, "that you married me because I was safe. You said I was manageable. You said you needed a wife who was simple enough not to ask questions and docile enough to sign whatever you put in front of her. You called me your golden retriever." Harrison winced, He remembered now. That was the night the wife died. Harrison, I said, my eyes locking onto him. And the mathematician was born. I realized then that you didn't love me. You employed me as a prop. So, I decided to become the most dangerous thing in the world to a man like you. I became a silent partner. I didn't get angry. I didn't scream. I just started taking notes. I am not manageable. Harrison, I am just incredibly patient. Harrison stared at me. The horror of realization washing over him, he realized that for 5 years, he had been sleeping next to the architect of his own destruction. Goodbye, Harrison, I said, hanging up the phone. Juniper, wait, he shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. Juniper! I stood up and walked away. I did not look back. I walked out of the prison, through the series of heavy steel gates, and into the bright, blinding sunshine of a free afternoon. The world outside was moving on, and it was moving quickly. The following Monday, I stood on the sidewalk in front of the headquarters. A massive crane was parked at the curb. Workmen were up in the basket, welding torches sparking as they dismantled the giant silver letters that spelled Thorn Dynamis. One by one, the letters were lowered to the ground, leaving a ghostly outline on the glass facade. In their place, new letters were being hoisted up, sleek, modern, and unpretentious. Hollis Innovations. I watched the transformation with Marcus Vance standing beside me. He had not only kept his job, but had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer. It looks good, Marcus said, shielding his eyes from the sun. Solid. Honest. It is, I agreed. We have a lot of work to do. Marcus, we need to rebuild trust. I want a full audit of the clinical trials. I want the scientists to run the labs, not the marketing team. If the data is bad, we publish it. If the drug fails, we scrap it. No more lies. The shareholders are nervous about the pivot to transparency, Marcus noted. Let them be nervous, I smiled. They will calm down when they see the quarterly returns from the legitimate patent licensing. We are going to make money, Marcus, but we are going to do it without looking over our shoulders. As I walked through the lobby, the atmosphere had shifted. The fear was gone. The hushed whispers were replaced by the hum of collaboration. People greeted me not with terror, but with genuine respect. I wasn't the dragon on the throne. I was the captain of the ship. Far away from the gleaming tower of Hollis Innovations, another reality was playing out. In a small, grease-stained diner off the New Jersey Turnpike, a waitress in a stained pink uniform wiped down a sticky table. Her name tag read, Serena, but she looked nothing like the woman who had worn a teal dress to a boardroom. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, the expensive highlights grown out to reveal dark roots. Her nails were short and chipped. She looked up at the television mounted in the corner of the diner. It was playing a business news segment. My face was on the screen. Juniper Hollis, CEO of the newly rebranded Hollis Innovations, rings the opening bell at the NYSE today. Serena stopped wiping. She stared at the screen, her eyes hollow. A customer at the counter banged his coffee mug. Hey, honey, more coffee over here, and stop daydreaming. Serena flinched. She looked at the customer, then back at the TV, where I was smiling, looking powerful and radiant. Coming, she whispered. She picked up the pot of coffee and turned away from the screen. There was no penthouse. There was no Paris. There was just the smell of burnt bacon and the endless highway. That evening, I returned to the only place that truly mattered. The house in Westchester was quiet when I entered. The nanny had already gone home. Mom! Leo and Maya came charging down the stairs. They were wearing their pajamas, their faces scrubbed clean. They slammed into me, a tangle of arms and laughter. I dropped my briefcase and fell to my knees, hugging them tight. Did you catch the bad guys? Mommy? Leo asked. He was 8 years old. I had told him that Daddy made some mistakes and had to go to a time out for grown-ups, and that I was fixing the work problems. Yes, Baby, I said, kissing his forehead. I caught all the bad guys. The work is all done. Can we order pizza? Maya asked. Daddy never let us have pizza on weeknights. We can order whatever we want. I laughed. We can have pizza for breakfast if we feel like it. It is our house now. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the pizza boxes were in the recycling, I drove down to the river. I parked my car near the embankment of the Hudson River. The city skyline was a silhouette across the water, the lights twinkling like distant stars. It was a clear, cold night. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. It contained the divorce decree. My lawyers had pushed it through in record time, citing Harrison's conviction and incarceration as grounds for an immediate, unilateral dissolution of the marriage. I had already signed it. The judge had stamped it. I was legally a single woman, but there was one last ritual to perform. I looked at my left hand. The diamond ring Harrison had given me 15 years ago still sat on my finger. It was a beautiful ring, objectively, but for the last 5 years, it had felt like a shackle. It felt heavy, weighed down by every lie. Every late night he didn't come home. Every time he made me feel small so he could feel big. I slid the ring off. My finger felt light. There was a pale band of skin where the metal had been. A ghost of the marriage. I walked to the railing. The water below was black and churning, moving relentlessly toward the ocean. Goodbye to the sheep, I whispered to the wind. I threw the ring. It caught the moonlight for a brief second, a tiny spark of silver arching through the air, before it hit the water with a negligible splash. It was gone, swallowed by the river. It would sink into the mud, buried alongside the old tires and the secrets of the city, never to be seen again. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sharp and sweet. It tasted like freedom. I turned and walked back to my car. I had an early meeting tomorrow. I had a company to run. I had children to raise. I had a life to live. The next morning, the world woke up to one final shock. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee, watching the morning news on the tablet propped up against the fruit bowl. The anchor, a woman with a serious expression, was reading the headline story. In a stunning turn of events following the collapse of the Thorn Dynamis scandal, the newly appointed CEO, Juniper Hollis, has made a historic announcement regarding the assets recovered from disgraced former executive Harrison Thorn. The screen cut to a clip of me standing at a podium. The $15 million recovered from the seizure of Mr. Thorn's personal assets and the liquidation of his illicit holdings will not be returned to the company coffers. The on-screen version of me announced. Instead, I am donating 100% of these funds to establish the Phoenix Fund. This organization will provide legal aid, financial literacy education, and emergency housing for women and families who have been victims of financial abuse and domestic fraud. The clip ended, and the anchor shook her head in admiration. A remarkable gesture, turning a story of greed into a legacy of hope. I turned off the tablet. Harrison had wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted his name on buildings. He wanted to be remembered as a titan. And now he would be. His money. The money he stole. The money he hoarded. The money he destroyed his family for. Was going to help thousands of women escape men exactly like him. It was the ultimate poetic justice. I stood up and put my cup in the sink. The sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a new day. My name is Juniper Hollis. I am a mother. I am a mathematician. I am a CEO. And I am finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Harrison's fate. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Sweet Rose Drama. Hit that like button to show your support, and smash that hype button so this video can reach more people who love a good revenge drama.